While well-synchronized butt kicking looks real good in movies, there are some who do it better in real life. Take a look at some of the most lethal warrior cultures in the world. Number 10, Knights Templar. We've all heard of them and wondered about their efficiency. They were just really good. Also known as the Order of Solomon's Temple, the Templars were one of the most powerful and wealthiest groups in the world. They wore white mantles and a red cross, and their legendary fighting abilities served well in the Crusades. They also developed their banking system and were perhaps the world's first multinational corporation. They were initially formed to keep the pilgrims safe from attackers, and often received many gifts, including land and businesses. The Templars were often used as an advanced shock troop, and the heavily armored knights on their war horses often broke enemy lines. But, well, power corrupts, and not even the Templars were safe from that. In the year 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered their arrest under the charge of denying Christ, and that started their downfall. Number 9, Ninjas, Japan. Well, we all know of them as the major bun-kicking dudes dressed in black who beat people up senseless. Ninjas were covert agents and mercenaries in feudal Japan, and their functions included espionage, sabotage, infiltration, assassination, and guerrilla warfare. And while the Japanese considered them to be beneath the samurais, we have no doubt that they were in fact the same boss fighters. It was around the 15th century that the ninjas, or shinobis, emerged and were recruited as spies. The clans of Aiga and Koga were formed for the training of the first ninjas. And while it seems as if ninjas generally operate alone, there have been accounts where they worked in groups also. Their weapons were usually meant for short-range strikes and consisted of knives and short swords. They were also pretty good in disguises and generally carried ropes and grappling hooks to make a quick escape. That sounds like a pretty impressive array of weapons, does it not? Number 8, the Maoris, New Zealand. While you generally associate New Zealand with awesome sceneries and the Lord of the Rings, the Maoris, the indigenous people of New Zealand, are a fearsome culture. They arrived in New Zealand from Polynesia through canoes in several waves between 1250 and 1300, and soon developed their own culture, language, mythology, and crafts, not to mention their awesome fighting powers. They believed that combat is the way to achieve spiritual power, or mana as they called it. And well, they also sometimes ate the people they killed in order to gain their mana, though it was not a common practice, thankfully. But one thing is for sure, the Maoris are perhaps the only native culture that has ever been conquered. In fact, when the Europeans came to New Zealand, they were initially held back by the Maoris until infighting between the different clans gave them the advantage. The weapons of the Maori fighters range from clubs, taya, stingray spear, and shark-tooth clubs. If you do visit New Zealand, we recommend that you don't challenge a Maori to a fight. Number 7, Aztecs, Mexico. The Aztec culture flourished between 1300 and 1521 in Mexico, and a triple alliance between the Mexica, Texcaca, and Tepaneca tribes formed the Aztec Empire. Warfare was the most important force behind their economy and religion. In fact, they would often sacrifice war captives during their festivals. And while their armies consisted mostly of commoners with basic military training, they had a considerable number of professional warriors, which made them such a fearsome army. They were very well organized, with the leaders naming successors, so that if they died, someone would take their place. The warrior training began early at the age of 10, with separate schools for commoners and royalty. And once the boys had completed their training, they would go on to campaigns with seasoned fighters. And then, once they had taken captives, they were segregated into different clans based on their proficiency. There were main warrior clans in the Aztec army, which the soldiers got segregated into, depending on their proficiencies and the number of captives they had taken. Also, if they ever retreated during battle, their comrades would kill them. That pretty much tells us why they were so successful, right? Number 6, the Immortals, Persia. If you have seen the movie 300, you know who we are talking about. While they may have been defeated in the movie, they were some seriously awesome fighters. The name Immortals was given to an elite group of heavily armed infantry unit of 10,000 soldiers by Herodotus. They consisted mainly of Persians and served as the imperial guards, as well as the standing army. Wicker shields, short spears, quivers, swords, slings, bows, and arrows were the weapons the Immortals carried, along with a headdress. Some of their most famous conquests include Cambyses II's conquest of Egypt, Darius I's invasion of India, and the Battle of Thermopylae. It is no wonder they were considered so fearsome. Number 5. Incas, South America. Present-day Peru was once home to the Inca Empire, who used conquest and peaceful assimilation to incorporate a large portion of Western South America into their kingdom. Their success was largely credited to their army, whose officers were chosen during the Huarachicuy festival after displays of racing, marksmanship, simulated combat, and battle drills. The army was divided into different battalions, and each battalion was composed of a single ethnic group under a warlord. And their tactics were simple. They would march in huge numbers to intimidate the enemy, and then the troops would rally to attack. The army was pretty disciplined, and they had the logistics to support them with roads and staging areas. Their gear included shields, helmets, and armor, and the weapons ranged from the flexible spears called estolica, slings, bolas, macana, clubs, axes, and the bow and arrow. And while they did have their share of peaceful conquests, they were not the ones to shy away from a violent one. No wonder the Inca Empire grew so rapidly. Number 4. Mongolian Army. The name of Genghis Khan was often enough to send kings running for cover all over Asia, and the reason behind the dread of his name was the Mongol army. They were technically a very advanced army and adapted their nomadic style into their fighting style as well. The army was divided into many units, and the unit leaders had the license to execute the orders they received in any way they thought fit. There was also an elite force of warriors called the Kashig, who served as the Imperial Guards. The reason for the army's success was their mobility, and each soldier had 3 to 4 horses, which allowed them to travel at great speeds. The soldiers were trained in horse riding, archery, unit tactics, formations, and rotations. They were generally arrayed in groups of 10, and the one unbreakable rule they had was that if any soldier ran from danger, he and his 9 companions would all face the death penalty. The Mongol army presented a pretty scary picture, with their heavy coats fastened by a leather belt, and from this belt would hang their sword, dagger, and more often than not, an axe. Their gear was also a pretty solid armor, as the coats were lined with fur with heavy silk shirts underneath. This protected them well from arrows. All in all, they were a pretty fearsome bunch. Number 3. The Roman Legion. The Roman Empire was one of the strongest, and the reason behind it was the Roman Legion. Typically composed of about 5,000 soldiers, the Roman legions formed the elite infantry unit of the army, and were composed of only Roman citizens. They used an eagle as their symbol from 104 BC onwards, and it was a very important thing. Loss of the insignia would often result in the disbanding of the entire legion. The reason the Roman legions were so effective was that they were pretty high up on discipline, and anytime that discipline was broken, it resulted in some serious punishment, including being beaten by stones or cudgels till dead. Another reason they were so effective was that they adopted superior techniques every time they came across one. Number 2. Samurais. Japanese culture is pretty much heavy on fighting, which is why they have many cultures dedicated to fighting. But perhaps the best one is the samurai culture. And while it consisted of other things like literacy, culture, and meditation, they were primarily a fighting force. The samurais were associated with clans and their lord, and were trained in matters of military tactics and strategy. And although they were mostly associated with swords, the weapons of the samurai ranged from longbow or yumi, pole weapons, Japanese matchlock staff weapons, and even clubs and cannons. The code of honor was very strong among the samurais, and one part of their code is seppuku, where disgraced samurais could regain honor by passing into death. They also had a distinct armor which was made from a series of plates, a thigh guard, and a helmet which was designed to induce fear into the opponents. There are many myths and legends associated with the samurai, which is probably why they feature in a lot of movies. Number 1. Spartans. Yep, you knew they would probably figure on this list. All thanks to Leonidas and his 300, the Spartan army was pretty much the center of the Spartan state, and the citizens were trained in the discipline and honor of the warrior society from a pretty young age. At the height of Spartan power, it was common knowledge that one Spartan soldier was equivalent to many soldiers of any other empire. The Spartan army were considered to be the backbone, which would protect the entire empire. Which is why when newborn kids were found to be weak, they were left on Mount Taygetus to die. They received training in camps known as the Agoge, where they endured much hardship. Their uniforms consisted of red capes and long hair, because they thought long hair was a symbol of a free man. I wonder if rock and roll picked up on that. The huge success of Sparta in battles was mainly because of the strength of their army. And, well, considering their reputation, we have no doubt that most of the enemy armies just conceded defeat on seeing them. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you think there are any fearsome warrior cultures that we missed out on, let us know in the comments. Also, remember to subscribe to our channel, it's free, and get updates on our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.